Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Yeah, thank you. I guess if this almost bizarre process, rushed, almost panic-stricken approach to planning the biggest city in New Zealand comes to grief, legally speaking I mean, it will be over the question of consultation or the lack of it in this case. May I ask you as professionals, are you aware of any plan change of this magnitude in which the public have no consultation before they're asked to present formal submissions? In your view, is this situation that unusual?
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you for the question. I'd like to make it really clear that we have done everything required of us legislatively in terms of consultation. So there is no legal impediment from a consultation perspective for you to be making a decision today. As I said to Councillor Fletcher, certainly in this council, we have said that the best practice for this kind of plan change is to have that pre-notification consultation. It's not a legislative requirement. And so, of course, as I said, we had always planned to do it that way, but we never got the provisions in time. So all I'm saying is that while we wouldn't have done it this way had we had our choice, and I don't think you would have either, we are where we are, and there is no legislative impediment for you to be making your decision today.
In the very limited consultation, which in my view was based on a schedule in RMA normally used for a regional council prior to notification to initiate a draft plan, but that schedule leaves out the community, which, given the whole philosophy the Minister announced of property rights is somewhat bizarre. But anyway, leaving that aside, the council did, in its very truncated period, consult with the local boards who were there in the role of local councils, though we don't have local councils, do we? So the local boards were nominated to fill that role, and iwi authorities, a number of which were outside the Auckland region, but not the people of Auckland itself. Nonetheless, the iwi authorities and the local boards, in my view, added a lot of value and made very pertinent and common sense observations and challenges. As a result of that consultation, and I note also that the Waitemata Local Board was not able to present today on a matter of extreme importance for its community, but leave that aside. In regard to this very limited rush consultation, did anything come out of the consultation, which I thought the points were very meritorious? Did anything come out of that consultation that materially changed the plan, the draft plan, in any way?
Could I, through the chair, just start with answering that, and then, John, you may have something additional in terms of detail. I just want to remind the committee that we were honest and open through this process, and certainly just prior to this consultation that we've just done, which said we did genuinely want to hear from local boards, from iwi, from others, from other local authorities, as we're required by statute. But again, because of the timeframes we've been given, that the government's given us, there would be limited ability for us to make significant changes. So I just want to say we were really open about that. I know that we have been able to adjust and deal with some obvious errors, but not all of them that the local boards have offered up or advised. And certainly there were a number of either specific areas or general provisions where local boards wanted to reduce capacity, whereas of course we need to make a capacity up, and so we did not have the time to whether look at that reducing of capacity and figure out then where to make up any of that loss. John, I don't know if there was any other specific matters you wanted to add as examples of where we have made some changes.
I think broadly covered off. 3 criteria were applied to the local board feedback, and the same general approach to the feedback from iwi. Those criteria were shared with you at the open public workshop on the 10th of September. And the criteria were, can it be achieved in the time frame? So if a local board was asking for changes to be made, could it technically be done? Was it technically feasible in the time frame? Was it aligning with the direction of travel for this replacement plan change in terms of some of the policy approaches around walkable catchments, corridors and so on? And was it by and large neutral in terms of impacts on the capacity given the bottom line legislative requirement to have the same or more capacity? So those 3 criteria: is it technically possible? Is it aligned with where the committee, the governing body, has been heading, or the committee has been heading? And is it having an impact on capacity? Because as soon as it is having an impact on capacity, where do we find it up? Because we've been running so close to the capacity bottom line requirement from government. And off the back of that, the specific requests for changes from the local boards in terms of amending the plan were unable to be achieved within this time constraint and within those 3 criteria. There were many submission points from local boards or feedback from local boards endorsing in principle certain aspects of this replacement, in some cases opposing it, but they were broad. In fact, the majority of the local board feedback were broad position statements as opposed to specific amendments. But just to be clear and transparent, for the specific amendments to zoning of properties, height controls and so on, because of the 3 criteria that we had to apply, we haven't been able to make anything specific.
So, can I continue, Mr. Chair? So the box was ticked, but whether the consultation aligns with the consultation as normally understood, as indicated importantly in the Local Government Act and our significance policy, whether it aligns with that form of consultation, natural justice consultation, no doubt will be challenged further along the road. Can I ask, in regard to the methodology, leaving aside the process and its shortcomings, to put it politely, the methodology and the intellectual assumptions as planning professionals for capacity of 2 million further dwellings, consented dwellings, that on habitation rates are recorded in the census, for instance, 2.7 works out with the current population is around 7 million population in Auckland. Can I ask you, for the record, very succinctly, where this 2 million dwellings came from? We know the unitary plan spent 3 years with an independent hearing panel, multiple submissions, deciding on a future capacity of 900,000 dwellings, further dwellings, consented dwellings, which would last 30 years.
Councillor Lee, we might just get your question answered because it has been answered.
Where, to come back to the question, where did this, and that 900,000 can be explained. How can one explain the 2 million dwellings? Succinctly, please, if you could.
Thank you, just through the chair. So the 2 million comes from the housing and business assessment and the modelling that was done on Plan Change 78. And if we remember, the big part of Plan Change 78 was the MDRS, the 3x3, all across the whole urban area. So in the model that the ministry, that we use, that the ministry understands and agreed that was the right model, that was the number that came up when you added up all of that plan-enabled capacity through Plan Change 78 and particularly through the MDRS. That's where the number came.
I shouldn't laugh, but it's not funny. So essentially, it's a number, it's there because it's there. Let me go further in terms of infrastructure, which iwi in particular, iwi authorities around and beyond the region pointed out was a serious shortcoming in the plan, or the lack of infrastructure. So if we're looking at a population, if you say 2 million is a number because it's 2 million, 2 million because it's 2 million, okay, let's accept it. That's a population added on to what we have now of around 7 million people in Auckland that we want to influence making decisions now. Even though it would seem on the present rate of building that would take 133 years to build those dwellings. Leaving that aside, as professional planners, obviously you're not just concerned with housing in the housing market, you're concerned with the infrastructure and the city shape, city's economy and so on. Can I ask you, are you aware that in terms of bulk water, currently Watercare has sufficient potable water supply for a population of 1.9 to 2.1 million, and even maximising its consent to the Waikato River, and it would be very doubtful if that could be exceeded. That's enough for a population of 3 million. So as professionals, do you not have some concerns about how tenable to go out to the people of Auckland and impose on them a plan which will mean 7 million people? Is that tenable in your professional view?
Thanks, Councillor Lee. I'll get Megan to answer at the beginning, but it might be good to have, I know Gary has replied to this question quite a number of times, but it might be good to have Gary also explain the difference between enabled capacity and what we expect to be built, and and what 2 million actually means for every property in Auckland.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. You possibly stole my thunder, but I'm happy for Gary to say it too. Councillor Lee, I would be very concerned, like you, if plan-enabled capacity meant dwellings on the ground and meant population, but it doesn't. What it means is it is just a number that is provided for or enabled by the plan that will absolutely never all be built in any reality in this life, or possibly future lives. So if we... if that 2 million was about what we had to provide for and we expected to be built, then I would be just as concerned as you. And that is why we use the population models and what's actually happening on the ground, you know, like Gary has said, to then both for you as a council or elected members to provide us as staff and Aucklanders with direction of where intensification or where population will grow more or less. And that then allows the infrastructure providers to both plan and invest, including ourselves as a big infrastructure providers, to plan and invest where we might be putting that, because we are absolutely not planning for or investing for 2 million homes or therefore a 7 or 8 million population, as you say. Gary, I'm happy if you wanted to add anything else to that, or Mr. Chair, if you had anything else you wanted us to add.
Thank you, through the chair. Just comment, it's useful just to keep in mind, we're talking about the future, there's a bit of uncertainty, and two key sources are, I guess, the commercial feasibility of this capacity. So when the assessment was done for Plan Change 78, the 2.07 million homes, it was found at 10 years, roughly 50% of that capacity was estimated to be commercially feasible and infrastructure ready, and then out to 30 years, you get up to something like 75%. So that's one source, is around how much of it could actually be built feasibly. And to put that in context, if you think about areas where we've enabled apartments up to 6 stories, some of it's just not commercially feasible, and what we see is the townhouse or terrace house typology of 3 stories. That's an example of capacity that's theoretical but not taken up because it's just not commercially feasible in that location. Another source is availability. These homes are on top of land, top of sites that are used by people, often families in their home who have no intention of selling anytime soon, but it is counted in terms of the theoretical capacity on those sites. So we can't be sure of the availability. So those two sources, and then I think just tempting to compare quantities, but we have to not lose sight of prices, because the idea of having abundant capacity is that you would have more competition among landowners, you would reduce their individual market power and put the price of land and the price of housing on a more moderate path than otherwise. And I think that is one of the motivations from central government. Thank you.
Marching in lockstep and a march of folly.
Okay. Just one more time, Gary. Both plans include that 2 million-ish capacity, right? Can you just explain what it means, essentially every single property being developed to its full extent, every single person here developing their property to the full extent, and why a council or why the government would prefer us to have more opportunities? So what is that 2 million figure? Why is it there? Why is additional capacity enabled more than the expected housing coming?
Thank you, Chair. I'd perhaps describe it as a safety margin, taking into account not all of the theoretical capacity is commercially feasible, and not all of those properties that the capacity is counted on are available in terms of having willing sellers. We're also thinking about the fact that the abundant capacity has the potential to increase competition, reduce market power, and put the price of land and housing on a more moderate path than otherwise when we have abundant capacity.
Thank you. Councillor Ferry.
Kia ora. I've been trying to group my questions together in helpful little bundles, and I'm only partway through that, so I might need to come back with some more questions.
And sorry, Councillor Ferry, I keep forgetting, Phil Wilson keeps reminding me, on Nexus now, the Gary Blick's presentation has actually now been loaded onto this meeting's. So if you look at today's meeting, you refresh and it'll be in the attachments there. Sorry about that, Councillor Ferry.
That's okay. Useful announcement. Yes, so I've tried to bundle them together a little bit, so we're not popping around, but bear with me, I may need to come back for a couple later, as Councillor Fletcher's already indicated she will be doing. So my first questions are around the flooding aspects of Plan Change 120 in particular, and how it assists with addressing flooding. So I think Phil's probably the right person to, sorry, Phil Reid, not Phil Wilson. No offence, Phil Wilson. To answer these ones. So I wondered if you could just explain a little bit more about the objectives in E36. My reading as a bit of an amateur in this area around RMA stuff is that the language there is quite significantly stronger than in the past, and I just wondered if you could explain that a little bit further, the language and the objectives. Thanks.
Right, through the chair, Councillor Ferry. Yes, so there's probably a couple of things to think about when we look at the policy settings of E36. So broadly, we've differentiated brownfield land from greenfield land around the policy outcomes that we seek. Within greenfield land, there are choices which are more available to people as part of doing development. And so therefore, with respect to people looking to do subdivision use and development, there's an avoid outcome that we seek there. In brownfield situations, you've got a huge amount of existing stock, which is already exposed to natural hazards. And so an avoidance outcome in many cases is not viable. But we do seek that we actually are limiting and reducing that exposure to natural hazards. Then it comes to the policy settings of the way in which we do that. And so, as I spoke about earlier, we're putting far more emphasis on the risk assessment approach and putting on people their choices that they have around what mitigations they do in order to actually address that natural hazard that they face and what they're seeking to use that land for. And so where it's a sensitive activity, such as a residential use, and going into a natural hazard location which is of significant risk, the expectations on them are that those mitigations are setting a high bar. There's a lot of them which are needed in order for the risk that they face to be reduced from a significant level down to an acceptable level. So our development engineers would play a very strong role in that. The actual resource consent itself, the policy settings would enable for, if those mitigations were not brought forward, people do not wish to address those hazards and they wish to expose that development to those significant risks and therefore risk to life, that there is an avoid outcome that relates to that. And the use of the word avoid is quite specific. There's a lot of case law going back on the use of that, which provides the strongest hand possible for consent staff to be able to decline those applications.
Thank you. And I guess I'd just draw people's attention to that if they haven't seen those principles. They're on page 123 of Chapter E, which is available. The other couple of questions I have there is the timing around E36 becoming operative. So at the moment, I believe E36 becomes operative on notification. Is that correct? For PC 120.
The term that we use is legal effect.
Sorry,
which
yes.
means that it bites straight away. It actually triggers the need for consents. Yes.
And so if there's any delay to us notifying or doing what we may address through an amendment today, what is the impact there on when E36 bites, to use your language?
So if there was to be a return to the operative plan, or if Plan Change 78 was to continue, then yes, E36 is not amended in any significant way by Plan Change 78. It has essentially got all of the operative provisions in it. And so therefore the activity status, which in most cases is a restricted discretionary activity, would continue. That provides a relatively weak hand in the way in which consents are assessed. So therefore consents that continue to come in until such time as that chapter is strengthened would continue to be addressed in the same way that they have been since 2016.
So to put that in non-planning language, sorry Phil, is it fair to say then that if we don't go ahead today, then there is a risk that E36 is not strengthened soon, that it would be delayed?
Yes.
Thank you. That's pretty important in my part of the city where it was raining again when I left this morning. Also, can I just ask about, obviously E36 applies in the floodplain areas, right? What I've been referring to as the blue blobs on I think it's the second iteration of each map for the 5 maps for each local board area. And I have had raised with me issues about, okay, but what are we doing outside the blue blobs in parts of a catchment that potentially contribute to increasing risk within the blue blobs or indeed outside the blue blobs and, when the wind's blowing in the wrong direction or whatever. We had a quick chat about this yesterday, but I'd just like to, for you to explain. I understand that is linked with the National Policy Statement on Freshwater Management, and so what is our opportunity to address that through this process, or do we have to come back later, regardless of what we do today?
There's a little bit which is being able to be addressed through this process. Under Plan Change 78, in order to actually look at impermeable surfaces on properties, there is not what's called a core standard that applies. It's an assessment criteria matter. Within Plan Change, the draft replacement Plan Change, we're looking to move that consideration of the impermeable surfaces from being an assessment criteria matter to becoming a core standard. Okay. Now, just to remind you, those standards are for the mixed housing suburban zone, single house zone, and mixed housing urban zone. You can cover up to 60% of your property in an impermeable surface. and within the terrace housing and apartment building zone, you can cover 70% of your property. There is a slightly stronger hand which has been provided through the draft replacement plan change on that matter. Turning to the remainder of your question, yes, you're right. We do have a piece of work which is sitting as a work stream under the NPS FM. And the reason it sits under that program is that it cuts across water quality, water quantity, and natural hazard management. And whenever you're dealing with a planning matter that deals with water quality and quantity, then it gets caught by what is called the freshwater planning process. Now, the freshwater planning process, in turn, has its own timelines in play. And so, like NPSFM, it's affected by essentially a stop, which is there until either the NPSFM gets re-released with some sort of directive around a plan change. If that doesn't happen, then the timeline is that nothing can happen until after the 31st of December 2027. The third option could be that council chooses to address that as part of the review of the unitary plan, or what's going to be called a combined plan under the new system. So there's potentially a 2026 date, potentially a 2028 date, or potentially a 2029 date for that strengthening of provisions that relate to the management of stormwater sensitive activities outside of floodplain areas.
Yeah. Thanks, Phil. I had been considering potentially putting up an amendment on that. I'll keep thinking about that. More noting that constraint. Sorry, I keep using the word constraint, and I know that has a similar specific meaning in RMA law, and I don't mean it in the RMA way. Sorry. Okay, thank you. I have a couple of questions around, well, actually, before I move on from the flooding stuff, this is actually kind of a quasi-process, quasi-plan change 78 question, because I wasn't on governing body when plan change 78 was considered in 2022, and I've been looking back at the minutes for it, and I can't see any evidence of an amendment put up or anything to put it in as a qualifying matter or anything like that. There is some stuff about the use of the low density residential zone, and that could be used to address flooding risk, but I don't see that actually playing out on any of the Plan Change 78 maps. So I wondered if there was sorry, I'm asking you to go back in time a bit, and I understand if people don't necessarily have an answer to this off the top of their head, but I would like to understand why we didn't potentially use low density residential zone more in the Plan Change 78 maps in these urban areas where we now know, post the 2023 floods, there are significant risks to life. If you're able to answer that, sorry, it's one of the questions I probably should have asked ahead of time so you were prepared.
Through the chair. I suppose that the first thing to put on the table is that, yes, the relationship of Plan Change 78 and its zoning to flooding and natural hazards was a matter that was considered. The second thing is what's referred to as Section 80E of the Act, which acts as a barrier around our ability to take anything which was operative in the unitary plan and make it stricter.
Right.
Okay, so within that setting, going into Plan Change 78, a lot of urban Auckland had already got a single house zoning.
Yes.
And so for those parts of urban Auckland that had that were subject to flooding, we had a choice around using, as a qualifying matter, flooding to be able to hold the zoning at that single house zoning. And we did. The information that we had at the time was not as good as what we've got now. Some of the criteria that we used to determine which sites would hold that single house zone are different from what we're using now. But yes, we did keep a number of sites across Auckland as single house because of flooding, and it did act as a qualifying matter.
Okay, thank you.
Could I just, and I know I'm not supposed to answer the questions, but just to clarify, to make it a little bit clearer, the low density zone was used to basically hold back on the MDRS, but we had no guarantee we would win that through the hearings. That was what our best assessment was. When we wrote to David Parker, 6 days after the floods essentially, we asked if we could delay Plan Change 78 to improve our qualifying matters, but it came back very clearly that we couldn't downzone still from the unitary plan. So we could have strengthened the qualifying matters, but we could not go backwards. So we could help protect the upzoning, but we could not do any downzoning. And that was not brought up during Plan Change 78 either through the process. There was no discussion about downzoning. Largely it was protecting the areas that were already low density and trying to hold them back. And as Councillor Newman and others have said, other parts of Auckland weren't lucky enough to have some of that downzoning to begin with. North Shore suburbs, some of the coastal areas were already downzoned, so they could have it, but many parts of Auckland did not have. And what this plan does is kind of give the same approach to every part of Auckland.
Yeah, and I have to say I can see that quite clearly in the comparison maps, some of the suburbs in my area, where you can see a sea of mid-orange in PC 78 versus much more nuance in Plan Change 120. Linfield's a good example there. Thank you. Okay, so next question. Sorry, Mayor. I did mention I had a long list. You love my long lists. You're going to miss me if I'm not here to ask any more long lists of questions. And this is completely different. The 15-storey and 10 stories for the 5 named train stations, where does that requirement come from? Like, are we required to do that? Or have we invented that?
So this came through the bill that went through Parliament on the 21st of August. So it's now part of the Resource Management Act, and it applies specifically to Auckland Council.
Okay, thank you. So does that then imply that we don't really have any flexibility on that for those 5 stations, which are all in my ward?
Yes.
And I note that the law also says at least 15 or 10. So actually we've gone for the minimum, right? 15 and 10. Megan's
Yes,
nodding,
we have.
just for the record.
Sorry, we have gone for the minimum, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Also, this is possibly a question for John. Sorry, Megan, trying to share it around. Because I know we've been talking about this. So one of the things that's come up in my area as well is so for example, Plan Change 94, which is the Carrington precinct, there's a number of other smaller plan changes where they might be partway through a process, they're not operative yet. How will we capture those through the remaining parts of the process if we go ahead with PC 120?
I can take this one. Yeah, there's this complicated situation that you've referred to, Councillor Ferry, where we've got some plan changes for specific sites in Auckland that are not quite finished yet. They're not operative. Until they become operative, the approach we're taking with the replacement is to essentially reflect the zoning that's in the unitary plan right now. And the mechanism would be either through a council submission to give broad scope for the hearings panel to consider that matter and adjust the zoning as those plan changes catch up and become operative. There is another technique that would be to do a carve out of those specific locations, but I think we're broadly, maybe we just double check that and perhaps come back to you, but we're looking at the approach of rolling over the current zoning and then using the council submission to give the panel scope to tidy things up. Otherwise, you do have a situation where this new Auckland-wide plan change comes crashing over the top and potentially undoes a lot of effort that's gone in by applicants, submitters and the council to those site-specific hearings. So they're a small number, we're well aware of them, we're tracking them really carefully through this process.
And so that's normal with a plan change like this? I mean, well, we've had some discussion about there being errors, and Megan mentioned before that, you know, there often are areas when, even when we've gone through significant pre-notification consultation, part of the purpose of the submission process is to take into account the local knowledge that people hold and they can identify them and those can be resolved. So this is a normal type of thing?
Normal in the sense that in the context of a big plan change covering so much of a city region, this is the sort of thing that you need to do. And with Plan Change 78, there were some lessons learned in that there were some situations like that did get caught out a bit. They were sort of caught up in 78, but they were already in train with a specific plan change process. So we're looking to learn the lessons from that. The provisions that you have attached to the agenda are reflecting some of that, and it is a sort of technical matter that we will be correcting through, as I say, through a potential council submission.
Thank you. And I guess also, you mentioned there the option of a carve out. I've found it incredibly frustrating that we carved out the light rail corridor. So I can understand the reservation about using that as a mechanism. It's made this conversation extra difficult in my ward. Yeah, okay. So the next question I have, there was a question before about changes from the limited amount of consultation we were able to do. First question is, why were those consultation opportunities so limited? Might be a Megan question.
Look, it does relate to when so in order to even have this conversation about withdrawing Plan Change 78, we had to get legislation change. And so while that was first kind of mooted back in 2022, it certainly was the end of the previous government from 2023 into this government. So those changes, whilst we've been talking about it for 2 or 3 years, didn't come through till August. And of course we are in a local government election year, so the elections come, 11th of October. So that's the time frame was the crunch. That wasn't what we were planning for. We were planning for being able to do something in our kind of normal way. That was the time, and so we undertook the legislative consultation required.
Right. Yeah. So that was the only consultation we were really allowed to do by law, given the time frame. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Thank you. And so we did consult though with local boards, iwi, adjoining councils and ministries, and I have 2 questions about that. One is changes from that input. I have noticed a number of very minor but small changes between the maps from 2 or 3 weeks ago and the ones that are on the agenda now. So it's clear to me there have been some small changes made. Is it possible, well, in the next iteration, if Plan Change 120 goes forward today, will there be more public information available that makes it easier for people to see those and see what impact, what changes already happened, to give them a sense of further change that they might be able to advocate for?
Yeah, through the chair, we are looking to close the loop with local boards.
Right.
Talking specifically local boards, to let the local boards know what changes have occurred. As I mentioned before, the broad statements from local boards not asking changes, there was no action required. I did say that we haven't really undertaken any actions, but some of that was because the actions were already taken through the team between the August version and now, having picked up on those errors. And in some cases, they explained that to the boards. You might be aware that when some of our staff attended the board meetings and some of those errors, anomalies were pointed out, the staff were able to say, oh, things have moved on.
Yep.
And we were able to share updated maps. So, yeah, it was just that iterative process. So, yeah, there were some things that the boards did identify that had already been made. And we will close the loop with local boards.
Thank you. And I did particularly feel for the 2 of my home local boards. They had to resolve very early in this process before a lot more of the information had sort of been shared and understood. And so I think there is a difference from some of those local boards that resolved earlier rather than later in that quite restricted time frame too. My next question to that is the ministry response from Ministry of Education. I think that's the only ministry response we received. I was really disappointed that it didn't address the issues around school capacity. That's been raised a lot with me, and Councillor Leone raised that as well. What further conversation can we have with them through this process? Because, I think you outlined well before that they kind of need to respond to where we're anticipating more population will be. How does that actually work through the next phase of the process? Or is it more we decide where there's going to be more housing and then they need to provide capacity accordingly, as opposed to we restrict capacity based on where they currently have capacity, if you see what I mean?
Through the chair, a really great question, and again, is one of these situations where it would kind of be awesome if we were all able to align and had all of the same direction kind of across Auckland and possibly nationally as well. We have regular monthly meetings, or I hold regular monthly meetings with a number of ministries, including education, around matters of growth and infrastructure, including obviously our internal Auckland Council group. We also have relationships and meetings with education as well, as they seek to understand what council's direction is and therefore what that means for them. So I guess my answer is we continue to work directly with ministry officials, not always ministers, or certainly not, I don't really think at the education minister level, but certainly at official level, to assist them, but also to understand what some of their challenges are as well, and whether there's something we can help each other out on. It's not perfect, but it is we have a strong relationship and we do our best. Yeah.
Thank you. My next question is around sort of the spectrum of housing capacity, and trickle-down economics has been well discredited, but is it fair to say that in housing there is a bit of a trickle-up effect, that the more housing we provide, the more things become affordable across the spectrum? Is that a fair assessment, Gary? Sorry.
Through the chair, thank you, councillor. I just comment that for a home, the land is the most expensive part, and so the rules that you're considering in terms of allowing more flexible use of land allows for less land per home. Talking about, for example, terraced houses rather than standalone houses, and so for people's incomes, which haven't changed, they've perhaps got more choice of location and housing type, and so that's the effect that we've seen with the unitary plan. So I would say that what we've learned is that more flexible land use that allows less land per home increases choice, gives people, given their incomes, more options for where they can live and what type of home they can have.
Thank you. And last question, you'll be super glad, Mr. Mayor. Which of these plan changes are better from an emissions point of view?
Ooh, it's possibly the hardest of the day so far. Look, clearly this is a wild generalisation, but if I just think about land use patterns, the more targeted to urban areas and intensification, and particularly that enable public transport use, is better for emissions than a distributed model, which is kind of everywhere. I know it's general, but I hope you understand the context of the answer that I've given.
So then it's fair to say that Plan Change 120 is more in that direction of a more compact city model than Plan Change 78?
Yes,
Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you very much. Councillor Turner.
Thank you. Thank you all for all the workshops and all the hard work you put into trying to train me on this stuff, and for those of you who have given me some very, very informative one-on-one sessions. But I can't get over, with all due respect to everybody, I can't get over being told that we have to sign up to a capacity which we will never use in our lifetimes, or maybe even the lost lifetimes of others. Is that not the definition of irrational, not logical or reasonable?
I perhaps won't answer that exact question, but I know what you're saying. And again, all I can say, and Gary, if you want to reiterate your comments, is that plan-enabled capacity is about providing choice and more and as much supply and opportunity for people to choose where to live and how to develop, and in this case, intensify in some areas and not in others. So it's not a target of population or even the number of dwellings to be permitted, but what it does do is provide choice and provide the market overall and over time more affordable options than otherwise. Gary, you're welcome to add to that.
Thank you, Megan. I think those comments are fair. If I could add just a little bit to say, I think this is less about comparing quantities and trying to solve an equation to say perhaps we need a certain number of homes in the near term or the long term, therefore we need to have a certain number of development opportunities because of the uncertainty involved. There's an argument that you need a safety margin to say let's enable the market to function better, the housing supply to meet demand by creating abundant development opportunities, given the uncertainty of what's for sale at a time for redevelopment and given what can actually be built on there, given the commercial feasibility of the location.
Thank you, but what you've just described is not what the people are seeing out there in the real world. And the, one of the things that they're struggling with the most is not the capacity, but the capacity to build. So often, you talked about combining sections and how it fits on the section. We don't seem to, in our planning, actually work out how we're going to build it within that footprint. Often the problem is that it's the build that's affecting everybody, and then with this capacity, we could be building for decades and decades and decades. So, if I try to go back and try to explain my vote to the people, I can hear them yelling at me in West Auckland right now, would you put your head in a gas oven just because someone told you to? So my question to you is, how do I fight back hardest on this capacity? Like if I just vote no here, you're saying that we're going to end up in a worse situation than we could go forward with the alternative plan change. That could bring us, consultation that could give us a chance to pull back on the capacity, or is that impossible?
Through the chair, at the moment the capacity is legislated, so it's in the Resource Management Act and the National Policy Statement of Urban Development. That's why I guess we're talking about the capacity number, because the government's made it a requirement on us. So and that is your choice. You can continue with Plan Change 78 and the issues, particularly not being able to deal with natural hazards, if that's important to you, and the prevalence of MDRS. So those are some negatives about Plan Change 78, to continue with that. If you withdraw that and replace with this, you will be able to remove MDRS. It will be a more targeted spatial distribution, but there will also be some challenges and concerns by residents about where some of that intensification is going and what that might look like on the ground. So, it's that's the choice. It's the pros and cons. Yeah.
Thank you. The choice I'm trying to come up with is how I leave that irrational concept or demand with the people who made it. So as you answer the rest of the questions, that's where I'm trying to find out where we're heading. Thank you.
Sorry, was that a question to me? I was just... Okay, thank you. Councillor Henderson. Sorry, Councillor Turner.
Sorry. That, and on the microphone as well. Sorry about that, team. I've got two questions for Gary. And just before I start, could I just get the map brought up from the presentation that was given? I think it's page 8, 10 September. That's just been loaded onto Nexus. Thank you. While you're doing that, thank you so much. This might be a Year 9 economics question, but it has been questioned in some quarters. Does adding capacity have an effect on house prices?
Through the chair, councillor, I think there's good evidence that it does through the effect on the quantity of homes supplied, and the quantity affects the price of homes.
Thank you so much. We don't have the map yet. That's okay. There's a map. Hopefully it'll come up. Pattern of demand for housing.
Sorry, I'm just getting so it was page 8 of Gary's presentation that was just uploaded.
I did give a heads up about this.
I think Councillor Henderson wants it
Yeah.
there if possible. It just take a couple seconds, sorry.
Okay, so all good. When the map comes up, which shows kind of a heat map of the demand for housing in the Auckland area, could I just get you to explain that in a little bit more detail? Because I think it's a very important element of this that hasn't been discussed yet. so I didn't realise it was going to be so difficult. Okay, I'll come back. Should I come back to this?
Questions
I have
first.
other questions, but
Yep.
not for Gary.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Megan.
Gary can take a break.
Megan, thank you. So, in terms of the SCA, can I just, as a basic question, ask how much has been retained in terms of protection from the Auckland Unitary Plan baseline?
SEAs are the same amount as from the unitary plan. Oh, so,
SCA?
oh, I thought, I heard you say SEA.
The answer I was
My
expecting.
apologies. Sorry,
SCA.
Oh,
Is
special
the-
character,
area.
not special ecological area.
sorry. Special character, my apologies. Noel, I think you're online. I'm just prepping you, because there has been a reduction in the amount of special character since unitary plan. Oh, here he is. Noel, would you like to take us through that? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. Yes, there has been a reduction in special character, both through the Plan Change 78 process and through the proposed replacement plan change. The difference between Plan Change 78 and the replacement plan change is approximately 730 properties being removed.
730 removed across the region. What did we start with, so we can give that figure some context?
Sorry, just to be clear, that's the difference between proposed plan change 78 and the replacement plan change. From, if you compare the unitary plan to plan change 78, it's approximately a reduction of 5,000, 6,000 properties. The replacement plan change removes an additional 730.
700. Okay, cool. So just refresh my memory, sorry, the AUP, how many properties are we talking total? Just because six figure, I need to give context to those figures, yeah.
Yep, sure. In the Auckland Unitary Plan, excuse me, there are 21,120 properties with a special character overlay, and I have the exact figures here for the replacement for Plan Change 78. That's 16,090, including the light rail corridor area, and in the proposed replacement plan change, there are 15,357 properties.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate that, and on the spot a bit too. Thanks, Noel.
Thank you.
Cheers. I'm moving on from SCA because I'll probably return to that a bit later today. Watercare. So Watercare's not here, but I'm just wondering, Megan, if I could be a little bit cheeky and ask you to...
Priyan is here.
Watercare is
Priyan's
here. Mr.
Oh,
Chair.
g'day, Priyan. Could I steal you? Sorry about that.
You've got your map now. Gary.
Oh, I got the map, so I'll come back to that in a moment, yeah. Priyan, sorry to put you on the spot, mate. It's a general question, but I'm just wondering, because we've got some really good stuff in the report here around Watercare's advice, but the most important bit, I think, for me, a great map was put out, and I've said before, we've got to print that off and put it on the desks of every councillor. Could you explain that map to me of network capacity, and particularly for central isthmus suburbs?
Sorry, through the chair, thanks for the question, councillor. So at a high level, those maps talk to our bulk network capacity options and limitations. When you look at those maps, you'll see the majority of the area in the central isthmus area and along those transport alignments are green. The green indicates that we currently have capacity, but that's based on the current framework, so through the future development strategy and the unitary plan as it stood.
Green as go.
Green as go.
Fantastic. Thanks, Priyan. That was all. Thank you. And Gary, back to you, my friend. Could I get you to just explain this map for the councillors, please?
Through the chair, thank you, councillor. This map shows estimated land values per square metre across the Auckland region for residential land. And we take that from the valuation data, and we're interested in it because you can see as an indication of demand. So the outcomes that we see there are a combination of people's preferences for different locations and their ability to pay for locations. And I think it's important to recognise that people have different preferences in terms of where they want to locate and the space they need. And often if you're a bit further away from things, you might have a bit more space, but you're willing to travel. And if you want to be closer to things, you might have to give up a bit more space given your income. What that is, it's an adjusted land value pattern, so we control statistically for the impact of our policy settings. So trying to look at the underlying or the location-based pattern of demand. And this does fit with what we see in the literature, is that locations that tend to offer better access to things that more people generally need in their daily lives tend to have more demand, and stronger demand in those locations is indicated by higher land values. Those things that we see that people generally want to get close to are things that you can imagine you need in your daily life that you might value. So services, including shops and hospitality and those sorts of things, as well as jobs, as well as transport systems that help you get to those things.
Awesome. Hey, thank you for that. So we've got red, orange, and a bit of green there with the most demand of the city. They're also able to take infrastructure, water infrastructure the best as well. So that's all able to be handled. So thank you so much, and thanks, staff, for indulging me. That's really kind of you. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Look, we have 3 more questions left, then we really need to go to a bathroom stop for everyone. Right, Member Hanaday.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions. Do you think that the replacement to Plan Change 78 and even Plan Change 78 is a blanket approach to Tamaki, or is it or could it be classed as something else? In terms of intensification for more houses for Tamaki.
Through the chair, look, that's a difficult question. I think we've said it before, I think even the chair mentioned it this morning. This would not have been certainly the way that we would have chosen to undertake this work. I think it has been clear that this council, since inception, is supportive of further intensification. Always the difficult trade-off is kind of how much and where that occurs. And that's clearly the trade-off of communities and also people around this table. The government, successive governments are more and more really centralising planning. They are taking it kind of for themselves because they're concerned that local government, not just Auckland Council, are not doing the right thing, in inverted commas, aren't making the right decisions, are concerned that councils are somehow constraining certainly economic development and productivity in their regions. So in that sense, it is a bit blanket, it's broad, and it's because it's coming from the top. We would do it differently, but I do think what it also does is it does ensure that we and you as decision makers are thinking about the need for, the implications for, and the kind of spatial distribution of intensification. I do, and I have provided advice and will continue to do so, that it's important that we provide and enable Auckland to grow. The question is where and how quickly, and can we afford the infrastructure and the other things that need to come with it. I hope that's answered your question.
So, do you think that the new and old I explain it a different way. We have a $5 billion resource, the CRL. Do you think that should be our focus in the first instance in terms of our push for intensification? Do you think using that $5 billion resource as a leg up, as a starting point, would that be the way to go? Rather than having Tower Road, where I live, inundated with 3 or 4 storied houses and can't even get my truck down the road.
Through the chair, look, that's exactly the point about kind of, what this intensification is and where it goes. That amount of money, $5 billion, clearly it should be incumbent on us to to therefore use that efficiently and provide as much ability for people to use that as we possibly can. And effectively what the government has said to the council is that they don't think we've done enough to therefore use that resource efficiently. That is a question that there may be 21 different answers to and views about, 23. So, that's that. So yes, I do, in that sense that intensification done well, and where it is enabled by particularly quality public transport, but other infrastructure, is where we should be going and what we should be focusing on.
Lastly, how did we get from where we were to where we are now with intensification? I keep harping on about where I come from. Not too long ago, I had 2 houses across the road. Now I've got 18. And around the corner, and around the corner, and around the corner, and all over the peninsula. So how did we get there, from where we were to there, without a plan change? Who let this happen?
Through the chair, and again, without knowing the specifics of the particular situation, the massive step change that this city took was through the unitary plan in kind of 2013 to 2016. And so much of what we're seeing today, or have seen over the last few years, is a result of the unitary plan zoning and the intensification that has been provided through that. Similarly, if you withdraw Plan Change 78 and replace it with this draft plan change and it goes through the process, that is going to add more opportunities and change in Auckland, as will the review of the unitary plan, which will come once the government has put a new resource management framework in place. We know it's going to change the act into 2 acts, and there will be additional requirements on us for whichever government is in power to do more and to go further. So this is another step, and there will be steps into the future. So yeah, it comes, I think, my not knowing the situation, predominantly from the unitary plan changes that were made 10 odd years ago.
So last one. So if we, let's just say we go with what's in front of us, will that slow down or stop the unbridled intensification out in some suburbs and have a more regulated and more onto it program?
Through the chair, look, I think if I take Te Aratu perhaps as or that kind of perhaps area, not in Erasmus, but just kind of on the edges, there will, should you withdraw or replace all that stuff, there will still be considerable intensification enabled in those areas. So you'll probably still see some of the kind of changes that you've been seeing lately. There are areas further out where it will be kind of downzoned and definitely reduced. But Auckland is really now on a path, and has been since that 2013, 2016 time, where there is more development broadly enabled. What this replacement plan change will do is to target it even more than what we've seen in Plan Change 78 into that more central isthmus area. We've seen, the green and red dots. So remember, it doesn't mean that you won't see continued intensification in all suburbs. Some you will see reduced, but what we expect is you will see more in those kind of green dotted areas that you saw, much more than we've been seeing today over time. Remember, we're not talking about tomorrow. we're talking about over the coming years and decades, that is our expectation.
And, and to Te Atatu Peninsula specifically, in that part of the peninsula, currently, Plan Trend 78 is MDRS 3 stories, 3 dwellings on every single site. Under this plan, it goes down to MHS, which is 2 stories, and there's some MHU, which is 3 stories, but there is more controls under this than the MDRS, so better private open space provisions, better height provisions, things like that. So it is a significant down zone for the area you ask questions about. I am going to go for everyone to have a toilet stop. Might have 10 minutes, maybe actually. 12. Well, come back at 12:31, and then I'll go to Josephine. But I think it's important that we have a stop for everyone. But 10 minutes, thank you.